In 1916, 4 people died in shark attacks along the New Jersey coastline over 12 days.
The attacks happened across different locations, different water conditions, different times of day. One occurred 11 miles inland in a creek so shallow the attacking shark had to turn on its side to move through it. The incidents generated the kind of fear that rewrites public behavior for generations.
Beaches emptied. Newspapers ran headlines that shaped how an entire century would think about what happens when a human enters the ocean. Almost everything those headlines implied about why the attacks happened was wrong. Not slightly wrong. Fundamentally wrong in ways that marine biologists spent the following 100 years trying to correct against the momentum of a story that was already too culturally embedded to dislodge easily. The shark was not hunting people. The shark was doing something far stranger and far more specific than that. And understanding what it was actually doing requires dismantling nearly everything the popular version of shark behavior is built on. Start with the predator model most people carry into this conversation. The standard mental image of a shark attack draws from the same template as every other large predator attack. A hungry animal. A target identified as food. A pursuit that ends in feeding. Clean, logical, horrifying. That model accurately describes how sharks behave toward their actual prey. Seals. Sea lions. Large fish. Marine mammals with the fat content, movement patterns, and caloric profiles that great white biology has been calibrated against across millions of years of evolution. It does not accurately describe what happens in the vast majority of documented shark interactions with humans. Of the roughly 80 unprovoked shark attacks recorded globally in an average year, fewer than 10 result in fatalities. Of the non-fatal attacks, the overwhelming majority involve a single bite followed by the shark leaving the area. No pursuit. No return. No feeding. An animal that identified a human as prey and attacked with predatory intent would not leave after one bite. Every large predator on Earth that has committed to a prey animal follows through unless physically interrupted. A single bite followed by immediate disengagement is not the behavior of an animal that found what it was looking for. It is the behavior of an animal that found out it was wrong. The identification problem is the center of the entire issue, and it is more complex than the mistaken identity explanation most people have heard. Yes, a surfer on a board viewed from below in turbid water produces a visual silhouette similar to a seal. That part of the standard explanation is accurate. But it only accounts for the initial approach. It does not account for what happens during and after the contact. A great white shark approaching what its visual system read as a seal arrives at the bite with a complete sensory picture that includes far more than vision. Electroreception has already mapped the electrical field of the target. The lateral line has already registered its pressure signature and movement pattern in the water. Olfactory data has been processed across the approach distance. By the time the bite occurs, the shark has assembled enough information to know that this is not a seal. The bite itself adds the final tactile confirmation. Human tissue composition is wrong. The fat ratio is wrong. The resistance profile is wrong. The shark does not continue because there is nothing to continue toward. The target was never what it appeared to be, and the bite confirmed that conclusion with finality. But the mistaken identity framework still fails to explain a significant portion of documented attacks because not all of them fit the surfer as seal silhouette profile. Swimmers at the surface in clear water have been struck. Divers in full visibility conditions have been approached and bitten. People standing in shallow water at waist depth have been hit. For these cases, researchers working in shark sensory biology have identified a different mechanism. One that has nothing to do with prey identification at all. Sharks are territorial investigators. The ocean is not a featureless space to a shark. It is a mapped environment full of chemical signatures, pressure patterns, and electrical fields that the shark reads continuously. When something unfamiliar enters that environment, it registers as a variable that requires assessment. Humans in the water produce an electrical and chemical profile that does not match anything in the shark's existing environmental map. Not prey. Not competitor. Not a known species. Something new. The investigation of an unknown variable in a shark's environment can involve close approach, circling, and in some cases contact. The contact is not an attack in the predatory sense. It is the only precision sensory instrument a shark possesses being applied to something it cannot identify through any other means. The bite is a question. The withdrawal is the answer coming back negative. Tiger sharks complicate this framework in ways that matter for anyone who spends time in warm coastal water.
Great whites are specialists with a narrow prey profile that excludes humans on caloric grounds alone.
Tiger sharks are generalists.
Their prey range includes sea turtles, rays, dolphins, seabirds, and a documented variety of objects that have no caloric value whatsoever, including license plates, tires, and pieces of boat hull. Tiger sharks investigate and sample their environment more indiscriminately than any other large shark species. They do not apply the same initial discrimination that causes a great white to disengage rapidly after a negative result. This is why tiger sharks account for a disproportionate share of serious and fatal attacks relative to their encounter frequency with humans.
Not because they identify humans as prey.
Because their investigative threshold is lower and their commitment to investigating an unknown variable more sustained. The difference between a great white interaction and a tiger shark interaction is not a difference in intent. It is a difference in investigative persistence applied to the same fundamental uncertainty about what a human actually is. There is a number that sits at the center of this entire conversation and almost never gets the context it requires.
Roughly 6 billion individual human ocean entries occur annually across global coastal populations. Swimmers, surfers, divers, fishermen, people waiting at beach margins. 6 billion entries into water that contains the full global population of large shark species. 80 attacks per year. That ratio should recalibrate something fundamental about how the relationship between sharks and humans is understood. Not because sharks are harmless. Not because the attacks that do occur are not serious. But because the number makes clear that sharks are not hunting humans. They are encountering humans constantly, across every ocean, in every condition, and treating the encounter as something other than a feeding opportunity in the overwhelming majority of cases. An animal that was hunting humans would produce a different number. Which brings everything back to those 12 days in New Jersey in 1916 and the story they generated. The attacks were real. The deaths were real. The fear was entirely reasonable. What was not accurate was the predatory framework the story was filed inside. The narrative of a shark that tasted human blood and followed it inland through a creek for 11 miles looking for more mapped to human predator psychology onto an animal operating on entirely different sensory and behavioral logic. The shark in that creek was not following a blood trail to a food source. It was following a chemical signature into an environment it had never encountered, investigating a variable that didn't match anything in its existing map, applying the only investigative tool it possessed to a series of targets that kept returning the wrong answer. Sharks do not hunt humans the way the story says because sharks do not hunt humans at all. They investigate us. They sample us. They determine we are not what they were looking for. And then, in almost every documented case across almost every ocean on Earth, they leave. The ocean did not become more dangerous when sharks evolved. It became more dangerous when humans decided they understood what sharks were doing in it. We didn't. We still mostly don't. But the sharks have been consistent about it for 400 million years.